Hello, my name's Aviva, and today I'm going to share with you guys all of the books that I read in September. I usually don't make an official monthly wrap up only because I read so many books a month that I tend to split up like my recent reads videos into like 2 to 3 times a month. But this month somehow got away from me and like I didn't end up making a recent reads video like in middle of the month. So I just like push it off till the end of the month. So right now I'm going to be sharing with you basically all of the books that I read this month. I read 18 books and I'm going to be sharing 16 of them with you only because my last recent reads video I kind of did right at the beginning of September. So I added in the first couple of books that I read in the month. So we're just gonna pick up where we left off and I'm going to share with you all of the books that I've read since my last video. But just so you know, I'm not doing this in the actual order that I read them. I kind of just like pulled off all of the books that I did read this month into a stack and we're going to be sharing them randomly. Anyway, the first books that I wanted to share with you guys is actually the entire Percy Jackson series. So this is the original middle grade series. I basically read all of these through audiobook. I do own the physicals, but I was kind of nervous going into it because I know that all of these books are like middle grade and I don't usually like reading middle grade only because like the reading level is just like too basic for me and I was really worried I would get bored by it. So I decided that I'm going to start them off with audiobook and see how it goes. And then I started the audiobook and I was just so in love with like the narrator. I really liked like the way that he was telling the story. So I'm like, I'm just gonna read them all through narration. So I basically listened to this entire box of books this month and I very much enjoyed them. I totally get the hype that Percy Jackson gets. Like just saying, like if you don't know what Percy Jackson is, I don't know where you've been living. Like Percy Jackson is very famous. It's like Greek mythology, urban fantasy. Like it happens to be middle grade, but I wasn't bored by it at all. I thought that these were such like fun adventure stories. I loved Percy, I loved Annabeth, I loved Grover. Oh my god, literally this entire cast was just such a fun time and I really couldn't recommend this more. I mean, so many people have read them already, so like, I mean, whatever, I haven't read them until now. So a lot of people also haven't read them, but at the same time, I'm just saying I read them, I love them, and I'm not even gonna bother explaining what they're about because they are just a little bit too famous for that. So if you saw my last recent reads video, then you might remember that the last book that I mentioned in that video was Vicious by L.J. Shen. So this is the first book in the Sinner of Saints companion series, and I basically loved this book so much that I ended up reading the rest of its companion series throughout the month. So I wanted to just like quickly remind you guys in case you either like forgot or you haven't seen my last recent reads video that this book was absolutely amazing. I literally couldn't recommend it more. I gave it an easy 5 stars. It's like a dual POV, dual timeline thing. It's about this like guy, he's very wealthy and you get to see him when he's in high school and he meets this girl and like this girl basically like her parents work for his family, like they're the help sort of thing, and he kind of like bullies her for a really long time and ends up like driving her out of town because like he's just that mean to her even though like he secretly likes her obviously. And basically then you get to see like 10 years later as they like run into each other randomly, like they haven't talked, haven't seen each other in 10 years, and then all of a sudden they're like smack in front of each other and he basically like propositions her, he wants to give her a job and like, you know, she really needs the money so she takes it and things are kind of going to go from there. So this whole series in general is basically about these 4 friends. It's these 4 guys, they're all very wealthy and like in present day they all own this company together. So they're very wealthy, they're all working together and like there's a lot of details going on that like, you know, you just read it to know, you don't really need to know now. But all I'm going to say is that this whole series is pretty steamy. It's all very adult even though like there are some snippets of like their high school days, and basically I absolutely loved it. Easy 5 stars. This entire series, really couldn't recommend it more. But basically this is the first book. It's a bully romance, and after that I ended up reading the rest of this series, which are these 3 books. So book 2 is Ruckus, and it's basically about this guy's best friend and then the girl from the first book's sister having a romance. So this actually was my least favorite from the series, but I still gave it 4 stars because it still had like the vibe of everything I liked from book 1. Like it still had all the good steaminess, the writing was still great, and the storyline in general was pretty awesome. If I read it as a standalone, I would have given it 5 stars, but because I read it as part of its series, it kind of like ruined book 1 for me a little bit. I still love book 1, but if I ever did a reread, I would skip book 2, mostly because the entire premise of this book basically like ruined the entire foundation for book one. It's basically like that these two people were like in love with each other the whole time, and like when you're reading book one, you had no idea about it. Like these characters obviously show up in book one, and like you just didn't see it happening. So I didn't really like how it kind of like broke apart everything that I thought about book one. So in that aspect, like I didn't like this book, but besides for that, the rest of the book was amazing. Like the story was still really good, and like the steam was really good. Everything about it was great. I just didn't like how it connected to book one in like all the ways possible, but it doesn't matter. You won't really understand what I'm saying until you read it, so no point in going into it. But basically, I loved it, and if you plan to read this entire series, then I recommend reading it in order and reading this book next, because it was still really good. And anyway, after that, you end up reading Scandalous, and basically, you're gonna meet the people in this book at the end of book two, and this is basically like an age gap romance. So I said that all of the guys in these books, like they basically own a company together, and at the end of book two, they end up bringing on like this new partner. And anyway, this partner has a 19-year-old daughter, and this guy who is 33 years old is going to end up having a forbidden romance with this little girl. I mean, she's not little, she's 19, but at the end of the day, he's 33, she's 19, so she is little in comparison. But anyway, it's an age gap romance. It was the steamiest in the series. I absolutely loved it. I'm not sure if book three or book one was my favorite. I really enjoyed them for like different reasons. So all I'm gonna say is that if you like book one, oh my God, just wait until book three. And then anyway, the last book is called Bane. This one was kind of like a standalone in itself, even though it's still connected to the first three books. But in this book, you're not following like the fourth friend from the like, you know, group of friends who own this company. You're kind of following the girl from book three's like ex/really good friend. Like you kind of meet him in book three and whatever. Anyway, he ends up getting his own story, and it was really good. It's kind of a little bit darker than the other ones. There is trigger warnings for like rape and trauma after a rape and getting over the trauma of going through a really scary rape and things like that. Like the girl's kind of going through a lot of things, and this guy is going to end up helping her. So it's a little bit darker in general, but it still had all those like awesome things that like you want from like, you know, seeing everything in the rest of this series. So basically, I recommend all of them, but be wary when you're going into this book that it is a little bit different than the first three, but I loved all of them. This entire series was amazing. Really good steam, really good romances, just like gonna probably be one of my favorites of the year. So I recommend the whole thing, basically. Next up, I have Scoring Wilder by R.S. Gray. So this is a sports romance. You're basically following this girl. She's kind of like the rookie of the year, and she is a freshman in college playing on the soccer team. And then you have this like pro football player who ends up like subbing in as her coach for the season. And he's basically doing it because he's got to like fix his reputation. He's kind of like a playboy, and like his sponsors are all being like, you know, clean up your act sort of thing. So he's going to like, you know, be her coach for the season to try and like look all much better. And anyway, they're obviously going to be very attracted to each other, but it's kind of like a forbidden romance because it's like soccer student sort of thing. And like she's 19 and he's 25, but it's not really an age gap thing. I just felt the like need to say that. But basically it's a soccer romance, not much more to say. The writing was amazing. Like I really, really loved R.S. Gray's writing so much that like after I read this, I went and bought like a couple more of her books and then added the rest of them to like my wish list, because I'm on a mission like officially to like get through her backlog, because her writing was just so addictive. Like literally, like I think that's what made this book amazing for me. I mean, the storyline was great. Like it was a great like soccer sports sort of romance, and I very much like that sort of thing. But also like it was the writing style and like just the way that like she built everything up and like all the scenes and like everything about it, it was just great. So basically, if you're looking for a sports romance that has a good amount of steam but is not too steamy and like too out there, and like you just want a good story, I definitely recommend reading this. So I was very serious when I said that I plan to backlog all of R.S. Gray's work, because I already started on it. The next book that I read, well, it's not the next book, but another book that I read in the month of September was The Fox and the Hound by R.S. Gray. So literally my only complaint on this book was that it was too short. It was just over like 300 pages. Yeah, it was like 320 pages, and I'm telling you, I would not have complained if this book was like 450 pages. It was really fun. I couldn't put it down. I literally read it in like a couple of hours. I had the greatest time reading it. So the storyline in itself is like a little bit classic, but it didn't really feel too cliche when I was reading it, and I very much enjoyed it. It's basically about this girl. She lives in a small town. She's this real estate agent, and this new guy moves into town. Obviously, everybody is going to know about it because it's a tiny town. And anyway, he ends up becoming her vet. she just like got this puppy, and she like a lot of it is that like, you know, she's like dealing with like training this puppy sort of thing, and he's going to be her vet, and obviously they're going to catch each other's eye, and he's only going to have eyes for her, but like he's got a lot of stuff going on. He just got out of like a long relationship, and like he just moved to a new town, and he's not really ready to date, but his mother is kind of nagging him and is like, oh, you have to come home for this family barbecue, are you dating anybody, like blah blah blah, and he's like, yeah, I'm dating someone, like just to get her off his back, and she's like, well, then you're gonna bring her to the barbecue. So he ends up convincing this girl to be his fake date for his family barbecue. In exchange, he's going to let her like sell him a house because she's a real estate agent and she kind of needs the commission. So it starts off as like this fake dating scenario, but honestly, it's not like a fake dating book. It's kind of like just what gets them like going sort of thing. So basically, I very much love this book. If you are a fan of fake dating, then there is like a touch of fake dating in this book, but it's not as much of a fake dating book than like I expected it to be, but I wasn't complaining. It was absolutely adorable. If you're a fan of dogs, if you're a fan of like small town, cute romance sort of things, then I 100% recommend this book. Next, I have Dear Ava, which read like a new adult book, but it was about high schoolers. And I'm not saying that in a weird way. I'm just saying like, you know, if you don't want like a high schooly book, like don't be like deterred by the fact that like these kids are in high school. It was like a little bit more adulty than that. And like it was pretty steamy. It was really good. Like I very much liked it. And I 100% do not understand the cover of this book. Why is there an adult naked man on the cover? I have no idea. It's about high schoolers. Anyway, this is basically about this girl. She ends up getting raped. Trigger warning, the book starts off with rape. I should have said that like right away. I'm sorry for like so blatantly saying that. But anyway, there is trigger warnings for rape. This girl basically gets raped. She's kind of like the poor kid in the school. She's like a scholarship kid. And like all these guys are like football players and like really fancy, really rich, that sort of thing. And one of them raped her and she doesn't know who it was. And it's like basically 10 months later after her rape thing happened. And all of them are not happy that she's there because they basically all got in trouble like when she got raped because like, you know, she started like an investigation sort of thing and they never found out who it was, but basically like, you know, nobody likes her and nobody wants her in school. And then she gets this like note in her locker saying like, I've liked you this whole time and like I've missed you not being in school, and if you need anybody then like text me sort of thing. And she's like, who the hell is this? Like this is a football player, but one of them raped me and I don't trust any of them. And the story's kind of going to go from there and like whatever. I don't really want to give anything away. So all I'm going to say is that it was really good. It has like that whole anonymous thing going on. And it also has like a little bit of an enemies to lovers thing going on. So all I'm going to say is that you should definitely read it. Don't judge the book by its cover. It was amazing and I loved it. I also read book 2 in the Dirty Air series. It's called Collided, and this series is basically like Formula One race car driver books. It's a companion series. So I read the first book like a while ago. I don't remember when, but I mentioned it in my last recent reads video, and it's basically just like a romance like that has to do with like Formula One race car drivers. So the guys are obviously very hot, very good looking, and you know, they're race car drivers. So this book is basically following like two people that you meet in the first book, and they have their own romance. So I very much enjoyed it. The only thing that I didn't very much like about it is that in book 1, we saw these characters already, and they were kind of like the sideline romance going on. Like you kind of got to see trickles of them like catching each other's eye and like doing things on the side and things like that. And then basically in book 2, we got to see the same thing over again. So what I didn't like about this book is that it felt slightly repetitive, and I didn't read them back to back. It's kind of one of the reasons I didn't read them back to back. I kind of gave a few book cushion in between reading book 1 and book 2 because I knew that it was going to be an overlap, but it still bothered me once I got to it. Like I just didn't like seeing the same scene over just from like someone else's point of view, seeing what else happened in the room that I've already been in sort of thing. So I didn't like that aspect of it, but put that aside, and this book was really amazing. I mean, it's not that steamy, but it does have some good steamy moments. The romance aspect of it is really good, and in general, I can't really complain about anything of this book other than that thing that I just said. I realized also that book 3 is going to do that for book 2. Like in book 2, we see a little bit of like the next romance that's going to happen, and I'm a little bit afraid that book 3 is going to feel the same way as book 2. So I've been pushing it off for a while just so that I put some distance between it, but I don't really mean to complain so much. I just wanted to like get it out there that I very much enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. It wasn't perfect, but it was still worth a read. So next up, I have Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas. So I actually read this like way back in the beginning of September, and I even put out like an entire rant review about this book because I had a lot to say. Like, I enjoyed reading it, but at the same time, I didn't really like this story at all, even though it was very addictive and I kept wanting to know how it's all going to play out. So I kind of ranted on like for 10 minutes straight about this book. So if you wanted to hear my in-depth thoughts about this, then I'm going to have that video linked in the description below. So all I'm going to say is that I read this book because of the hype. I really wanted to know what Penelope Douglas was all about. I've heard like mixed things about her, like that she's very taboo, but she's also very steamy, and that her books are addictive. And I will say that all three of those things are very true. This book is basically an age gap romance. It's about this girl who is 19 years old, and she ends up having a romance with her boyfriend's father. She ends up moving in with her boyfriend and her boyfriend's father, and a romance is going to bloom between her and the boyfriend's father. So it was very taboo in that sense. And while I'm usually okay with age gap romances, like I already mentioned in this video, that Scandalous from like the Sinner of Saints book was like an age gap romance, and I very much enjoyed that. So this is saying something that I felt very weird about the age gap in this book, but it's Penelope Douglas, and I guess that's just the way that she writes. She kind of makes you uncomfortable. So all I'm going to say is that I gave this book 4 stars. I very much enjoyed the read, but at the same time, it made me extremely uncomfortable. So take with that what you will. If you want to know more, then watch the whole video that I made ranting about it. So next I read the first book in the Thekian Chronicles by Julian Todd. So I read this book because my sister recommended it to me. She owned all of the books, and she's like, this is a really good romance. You should read it. Like, it's so much fun and addictive and all that sort of stuff. It's like a collection of 7 books, and you know, you're following one storyline throughout the whole thing, and it's got this aspect of like a stalker going on, but like this girl, she's really wealthy, and like, you know, she's got a lot of boys chasing after her because she's really good looking and whatever, all that sort of stuff. And it kind of sounded like I would enjoy it, but honestly, the writing style of this and the way that it was written out and everything about it, basically, I absolutely hated. I ended up like skimming like the second half of the book just because I was like, okay, where is this going to go? But like, I literally could not handle the writing style and the pacing of the book and all of that sort of stuff. So I'm very sorry to like my sister that I didn't like this book and that I'm not going to be continuing on with the series, but I read it and I had to mention it here. So I will say that if I read this when I was like 13 years old, I might have enjoyed it way more. And if you've read this series and you very much enjoyed it, like, you don't even have to tell me that. I know that the second book like totally picks up and is going to like go in a different direction, and like, you know, it gets way better. My sister told me all of it, trying to convince me to continue on with the series, but I seriously couldn't just get over like the writing style and all of it, that I don't really care to continue on with it. So if you're 13 years old and you're looking for a romance, then maybe I would recommend this, but at the same time, like, don't take that like very highly because I very much didn't like it. But if I was 13, I might have liked it a lot more. So take with that what you will. And the last book that I have to share is This Savage Song and Our Dark Duets by V.E. Schwab. So Victoria Schwab, V.E. Schwab, same thing. V.E. Schwab is like all of her adult books, and Victoria Schwab is her YA ones. So this is a YA dystopian about humans and monsters, basically. You're living in this like dystopian world where like humans and monsters, they're kind of living like among each other sort of thing, and you kind of have like, you know, this space divided. So on one side, all the monsters are living and like some humans live with them, and then on the other side, there's like, you know, all of the fancy rich people who don't want to live with the monsters and basically pay for protection. So all of these monsters honestly are kind of like vampires. So you have these 3 types of monsters. There's one monster that like, you know, doesn't come out in sunlight and he like drinks people's blood sort of thing, and like, you know, that's a regular vampire. And then you have these other monsters that are like vampires, except they like come out in the sunlight, so like, you know, they're pretty scary sort of thing. And then you have this 3rd type of monster that basically eats souls. So all of these monsters are kind of like made from like catastrophic events. So the regular vampires that like could come out in the day or can't come out in the day, they're just made from like people like murdering someone else or like something pretty violent. But then you have these like soul eaters who are very rare and like people don't really know much about them, and they're basically made from like extremely catastrophic events like a massacre or like a bombing or something like really big like that. So you're basically following this one guy who's called a Sunai, and he is one of those like soul eaters who like, you know, there's very few of him, and he was made from like, you know, a big massacre or something. And he's currently like a teenager, and his father figure, like his adopted father, is kind of like the head of the side of the world that like, you know, has all the monsters in it. And then there's like this other side of the world that like, you know, where people are paying for their protection. And the guy who runs that has a daughter. And these two people are basically going to go to school with each other. Like this guy is basically sent to this girl's school to get close to her. And she's like not really going to know who he is, that he's a monster. He's pretending to be human sort of thing. And the story's kind of going to go from there. So it's like monsters and humans mingling in this dystopian world. And obviously like there's a lot of problems in this world. And I don't really want to say much more. It doesn't really matter. Basically, if you like dystopians, if you like vampires and things like that, then I definitely recommend reading this series. It was really good. I'm currently like, you know, just in the beginning of book 2. I'm enjoying it so far, but it's kind of like, you know, a warish book, which I'm not super into. So I'm currently listening to it on audiobook, but I plan to like jump between audio and like physical. But basically, I very much enjoyed book 1. I half listened to it on audio, half read it physically, and I very much loved it. And I'm middle of book 2, so I figured I'd mention it here because this series is pretty solid overall. It was very hyped up a long time ago, and I totally get the hype. I very much recommend it. It was solid, and it was my first fall-ish read. I was saving it for fall because, you know, the monster vibe, it was giving me like fall vibes. So I read it now, very happy I read it. Anyway, that is all of the books that I wanted to share with you guys for my September wrap-up. I am curious to know if you've read any of these books and what you thought about them, or do you plan to add any of them to your TBR? I happen to have had an amazing reading month. Almost all of these books were like literally 4 or 5-star reads, so I definitely recommend like, you know, taking a couple of my recommendations from this video. But anyway, let me know down in the comment section below what you thought of all of the books. And either way, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not currently subscribed to my channel, please hit that subscribe button because I have great book recommendations. Come on, you're already at the end of this video. It means you like watching me, so just subscribe if you're not subscribed already. But anyway, thank you so much for watching this video, and until next time, enjoy reading.